stage that where you're looking down at people.
You what?
So, like in Cuba, when we
You were
present on a stage,
Oh.
and everybody else is down there. And
Did you like it?
it's like, I just think we're circus.
I do too. It feels more natural to me. And
and
like,
making eye contact.
it makes it so much
easier.
easier. I agree. I don't like, that's interesting that you say that because even a slight stage I don't like.
I know.
Like sometimes at NASA you end up on a stage and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'd rather be
usually
equal or
calm
like
down.
this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we also like moving around the room.
Yes, so me too. Yeah. Yeah.
You having a disturbance in your course?
Nope, I just wasn't close enough. It's too far. How's the volume been on Facebook Live since we got there?
Times, I hadn't had a problem until we did the Chinese event. Like the volume, like it picks up on my tablet. So like if you watch it back on here, you can hear it. But if you watch it on Facebook, it won't. So I'm like, crank the volume up on the tablet.
Have you asked them if there's anything like that? Like that they could do to help?
I think it's just a user
just a
thing.
user.
That's
Yeah. Oh well.
but we have ITV. It is being recorded.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. It's an attempt.
I'm not too worried. We'll have Zoom things.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking about that. Yeah. This is an interim.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We've been using Zoom, and actually our colleagues abroad now ask me, they're like, can you just send us a Zoom link? Because it seems to connect better than even Skype.
Oh yeah, Zoom for meetings is so much better.
And you can put 100 people
That's
in it,
true,
and
yeah, that's
everybody
true.
gets to see each
It's
other's
much easier
faces.
when I use my phone too because I just click on the link and it all happens. I don't have to dial anything in from the app.
Yeah.
And then what I love is the technology of like if the three of us are on and we're on different phones, it shows the person who's speaking and it like has a way of knowing who started to speak first. So it's not like phone where you're like interrupting. I mean that awkwardness. It's really pretty cool.
I know.
Now in terms of recording, I'm really interested to see
Yeah.
like in recording an event and stuff. It has that capability and I'm really interested to see how that works.
Yeah, because that's definitely.
Do you know anything about that?
So we just use it to
Just for like,
recorded calls. We haven't recorded anything. As in,
it may work
use
kind
it
of
as
the
an
same
external
way.
thing.
Yeah, maybe it works similarly. I don't know.
Here's this one. Whenever you're ready, you can just turn on the switch.
Okay.
And I just
Goes
recommend,
on my.
yeah, putting this on your coat.
That. Make it
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
And we're still waiting on Wichita's room to be available, but
Okay.
I'll just call them.
All right, how are you?
You guys start with that one.
Yeah, I'd like to start right at 12.
Okay,
Because I
yeah.
have a little thing, so even if like they're not quite on, it's
Yep.
okay.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep, sounds good.
All right.
Hi, Kimber. Sorry I couldn't make today morning.
That's okay.
I'm glad it's deadline, and so. Always good to see you.
Hi.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is Sarah's partner in crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. We call them the dream team. It's amazing. See, I'm going to start right on time because I know that people are getting food, but I think that's part of what I have to say. It's okay. I feel like I have to do an official thing. Hey. That's good. I don't know. That's a good question. Is there one up here?
I didn't see one.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Dr. Corntasia.
Sorry. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know that there are people outside still getting their lunch, but we have a robust program this morning, and I'm going to start with a little information, general information about International Education Week. So, happy International Education Week 2018. We come together to celebrate international education and the gift that international exchange is for all of us. With an increase of voices doubting and questioning the value of internationals and international educational exchange within our country, here are some quick, hard facts that certify the value to our state and community of internationals coming here. NAFSA, who is our professional organization for international educators, analysis of the 2017-2018 academic year shows that international students and their dependents contributed $39 billion to the U.S. economy. NAFSA estimates that 455,622 jobs were created or supported during this same time frame. And interestingly enough, because in our profession we've talked a lot about the decrease over the past year, that was an actual 1.2% increase in jobs supported, and a 5.8% increase in dollars contributed to the economy from the prior academic year. So that's good news for us. NAFSA also calculates the benefit to the state of Kansas at $260.2 million, with 2,499 jobs being supported by the 9,571 enrolled international students. More specifically, the University of Kansas generated $78.3 million while supporting 931 jobs, which is the highest among all academic institutions in Kansas. So we have a lot to be proud of about our international students and international exchange here at KU. The economic contributions of international students are in addition to the immeasurable academic and cultural value international students and researchers bring to our campuses and local communities. They support innovation and research, build bridges between Americans and other nations, and bring global perspectives into the U.S. classrooms and laboratories. At KUMC, we boast a robust international educational exchange program, hosting approximately 675 internationals yearly as visitors, observers, students, exchange visitors, researchers, and faculty, while facilitating the outbound international educational experiences for over 150 students and assisting 300 faculty, residents, and staff with their international professional experiences and global health endeavors. Of course, we couldn't do this without a great team. So at this time, I'd like to recognize my team. Angie Peterson, she's the Associate Director for Outbound. Alexa Smith right here supports our outbound endeavors as well. Outside serving lunch, we have Stacy Rader, Program Manager, Alexandria Harkins, and Arena Eras who support the inbound activities.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. While students and researchers also gain more than increased knowledge from coming to the U.S. for an educational or research experience, we should recognize that they often do so with extreme sacrifices to themselves and their families. They are courageous pioneers who put their faith in the unknown with the trust that their investment of money, time, and discomfort will make a difference in their lives and the world in which they live. International educational exchange is as relevant today as it was when William J. Fulbright established the Fulbright program and advocated for international exchange in 1946, stating, "International educational exchange is the most significant current project designed to continue the process of humanizing mankind to the point we would hope that men can learn to live in peace, eventually even to cooperate in constructive activities rather than compete in mindless contests of mutual destruction. We must try to expand the boundaries of human wisdom, empathy, and perception, and there is no way of doing that except through education. We depend on each other. We depend on other countries and other educational systems in order to provide educational exchange opportunities that humanize us and the world. Educational exchange that makes us deeply aware of our own dignity and humanity, as well as our neighbors' dignity and humanity. We need education that develops a better understanding of ourselves and our neighbors. Paulo Coelho writes in a foreword of his book, The Alchemist, "When I read about clashes around the world, political clashes, economic clashes, cultural clashes, I am reminded that it is within our power to build a bridge to be crossed. Even if my neighbor doesn't understand my religion or understand my politics, he can understand my story. If he can understand my story, then he's never too far from me. It's always within our power to build a bridge." In 2017-2018, the Office of International Programs sponsored or co-sponsored over 120 programs for more than 200 individuals. We are committed to building these bridges between our KUMC community, the state of Kansas, and our world. We thank you in advance for coming to our events this week to celebrate International Educational Week, to listen to each other's stories, to cross bridges, and build bridges between us. Today, we are graced with the presence of Dr. Gabrielle Malfati, who has spent a lifetime of crossing and building bridges in collaboration with others. Dr. Gabrielle Malfati serves as Director of Global Engagement and Ancillary Associate Teaching Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Missouri College of Education. Dr. Malfati holds a bachelor's degree in education, a master's in Spanish literature, and a doctorate in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Missouri. In her role as director, Dr. Malfati leads efforts towards the internationalization of educator preparation. In 2013, she established Mizzou Ed Teach Abroad, a program designed to give pre-service teachers an opportunity to internationalize their preparation with co-teaching experiences and cross-cultural mentoring abroad. In 2014, Mizzou Ed Teach Abroad was recognized with the NAFSA Region 4 Most Innovative International Initiative Award. Dr. Malfati's research interests include international education, organizational analysis of higher education, immigrant issues, and intercultural communication and adaptation. Her dissertation, Desegregation and Its Impact on Institutional Culture at a Historically Black University, received the Dan Cockrell Ed D Statewide Dissertation of the Year Award in 2009. In 2015, she was appointed as a reader for the prestigious Schwarzman Scholarship Program, and in 2016 was one of 9 U.S. international educators to participate in the Fulbright Nehru International Education Administrators Program in India. She serves on the editorial advisory board of the Journal of Global Education and Research. Today, Dr. Malfatti is here to share her presentation, Contesting Coloniality and International Academic Partnerships Through Reciprocity and Mutualism. With this, I give you Dr. Malfatti.
Thank you, Kim. Am I good? Yes. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. It is always exciting for me to talk to a different group of people. You know how once you start talking about the programs that you run, the exchanges that you're engaged in, it seems that you're always talking to the same circle. So it's always great to have a new group of participants in the conversation. I think that it becomes more and more clear each day that we live in an interconnected and interdependent world. And so the connections that are represented in this room are of global significance. I grew up in Colombia, South America. I now live in Columbia, Missouri, which is always a funny little, it's like this person's going to live in a Columbia of some sort. And I have had the privilege of having grown up in Colombia, living in the United States, being a product of U.S. education, now representing a U.S. institution, going back to my country of birth and establishing relationships there that allow us to create really interesting collaborations, because I have been removed from Colombia for 35 years. I came when I was in high school. And so going back to Colombia now in this capacity brings out a whole lot of other dimension of myself, my relationship to my native country, to my native culture. And I was sharing with some of my colleagues this morning that we start talking about things like cultural competence, cultural adaptability, cultural humility. And when you have an opportunity such as the one I have to go back to the place of your birth after being removed from it for a long time, things like cultural competence and cultural adaptability take on a different tone. Because I know that I am culturally competent in Colombia. I know what to eat, I know the rules of engagement, I know the language, I know how to move to the music when we go dancing. And yet I am not adapted to Colombia as a cultural context anymore. If I need to get a legal procedure done in Colombia, I know I have to rely on one of my relatives who lives there, who knows how to maneuver the system. Because as my mom would say, she's like, you're just too American. So I have become kind of very ingrained in the way that we go about life here. So as we have this conversation today, I want to invite you to think about how you move in the world. Whether that world is as big as the state of Kansas, or whether that world encompasses the hemisphere, or it encompasses the globe. And when have you had those opportunities in which you create a relationship with someone to achieve a purpose that is of common good, and how you have negotiated those cultural contexts that we all bring to these conversations, whether it is locally or regionally or globally. So today, two of the aspects that we're going to talk about are reciprocity and mutualism. And how do you achieve those relationships that honor what each of the parties in these international partnerships seek to get out of the exchange. And just as in every relationship, we all come into relationships with expectations. And very seldom do we talk about them. Even in interpersonal relationships such as a marriage, you may be married to somebody for 3 years to find out that what they were seeking out of a marriage and what you were seeking out of a marriage were not necessarily exactly the same thing. And it doesn't have to be, but being aware of what the other is expecting out of the relationship helps us create those mutually beneficial relationships. All this in the context of coloniality and the awareness of the supremacy of the Western episteme. So we're going to visit those terms real quickly here so you know what it is that I'm talking about. So when we talk about coloniality in this context, I am using Aníbal Quijano's description of it. He is a Latin American scholar. And pretty much what he says is, yes, we often talk about colonialism, post-colonialism, and those statements always focus on the most often European set of values that were imposed by force most of the time on a nation in the global south. But when we talk about coloniality, we take responsibility for what is happening in those global south locations after the colonizers left. So if Latin America looks the way that it looks today, if a country like Venezuela is going through the strife that is going today, yes, there is a legacy of colonialism, there is a legacy of relationships between the global north and the global south, but as architects of our own destiny, what have we done to create, to change, to reinvent the social systems and legacies that were left by other powers in our countries? So when we talk about coloniality in that context, we see a sense of responsibility, but we also see the opportunity to reinvent the way that we have been going about our relationships among each other and with the rest of the world. When we look at the supremacy of the Western thought, the way that we are looking at it right here is that at some time in the development of universities, research establishments, there seems to be a leniency toward seeing the West as the producers of knowledge and the global South or the rest of the world as that which we study, as objects of study. And so if you look at anthropological studies, a lot of the time they are not conducted necessarily by the people in the communities. I think we're seeing more and more of that, where scholars are rising from their own communities and focusing in those communities. But for a lot of the time, what we learn about the Mayan, we learned it from Spanish priests who had a vested interest in destroying the religious structure that was there when they arrived. Or we learned about Peruvian civilizations or sub-Saharan African civilizations from northern explorers, not from the people who were the experts in that particular cultural setting. Everything that I do and all the reflections that I engage in my day-to-day life usually come from one little thing that somebody says at a meeting, at a gathering, and it leaves you pondering. So I take a group of students to India every year. These are pre-service teachers, and we're always in India over the 4th of July holiday. So our students are like, oh, I can't believe I have to go to school and work on the 4th of July. I'm like, well, it's not Independence Day here. If you stick around till August 15th, that would be another story. But one of the principals once said to me, you know, since the U.S. and India share a colonial past with Britain, it would be really interesting for your students to talk about Independence Day from Britain during the 4th of July and compare it to independence in India and kind of like the relationship between India as a colony and the U.S. as a colony. And I had this conversation with her. I said, you know, the interesting part is that if you ask most Americans about you are a colony, like you have a post-colonial relationship with Britain, we don't think about it that way. If anything, we think we are equals with Britain, okay? And that's not the case in India. That's not the case in most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa that had a European colonizer. That's definitely not the way that Latin Americans think about Spain. I mean, some may relate to Spain as the colonizers, the ones that came and took everything and kind of thievery. Others relate to Spain as the Holy Mother Spain. And in India, you have that as well. The relationship to the British presence in India is thought of in different ways by people that lived that experience in a different manner. But when it came to thinking of us as a post-colonial society, we hardly ever, if ever, relate to Britain in those terms. And so that kind of triggered some thinking, as Kimberly and I were talking about this presentation, on internationalization and how it is that we go about our export of knowledge, our export of scholars, our export of students, and what it is that we seek in those relationships abroad. So when we think about what's in it for our students, we want them to be critical thinkers, we want them to engage with the world, we want them to expand their global view, and the economic competence and the ability to compete in that interconnected world is there. And this is part of a neoliberal mindset that kind of permeates a lot of what we do and about the role of higher education in this nation as well. So if we look at our communities, if we engage Columbia, Missouri, which is a very Midwestern town. We do not have a cosmopolitan population. We are not in one of the coasts where cultures are exchanging and interchanging all the time. We feel that if we bring international scholars to our community, if our students go abroad, the community itself benefits from those exchanges. We also look at the role for the nation. And if we think about Senator Fulbright, Senator Paul Simon, they saw international exchange and actually called it by the term self-diplomacy. It is, if we send students abroad, if we send scholars abroad, if we bring students from abroad, there are going to be human exchanges that are going to help us understand each other in different ways. I am somewhat moving away from the self-diplomacy, and what I would like to see, and this would be another presentation, so stay tuned, is international education as activism, because it gives us an opportunity to engage with the world and to represent the United States and to create exchanges in a very different framework than what has been provided so far. And if we think about the institutions themselves and how they can be changed and how they can be agents of change, where we no longer respond to, oh my goodness, the world has globalized and we have to adapt education to function in that globalized society, but how is it that we are going to shape globalization? It seems that until now, all K-20 education has reacted to globalization happening and we have to adjust to it, not how can we impact it. So as we think of academic activism in a way, our circle of impact has to do with curriculum, has to do with how we relate to one another, how we integrate foreign populations into our classroom, how do we behave when we are abroad. We have those opportunities to be different, to act differently, to create differently, and to dream differently. So far when we establish international partnerships, especially with the Global South, they are very asymmetrical. They are not necessarily equitable because our systems are very different. We often want, when we go abroad to bring students into our institutions, we want them to come for 4 years and finish their degree, or come and do their whole master's degree here, or their whole graduate school. Yet, most of the mobility of students from the U.S. outbound is for short-term, and by short-term I mean less than a month, education abroad opportunities. So we mobilize a whole lot of students abroad, but the depth of the opportunities that they have to truly engage with the communities and societies in which we are hosting them is minimal compared to what we expect from international students and scholars who are committing to earning a degree with us. I don't know if KU has any inbound short-term education abroad programs. I know we don't, and I would love to see that. You do?
We do, because we're a med center, so it's a little bit different. You know, we're not the traditional study abroad. So like our medical, nursing, and school of health professions go out for short-term clinical rotations, typically 4 weeks. We also welcome
That's awesome.
the students. So in that respect, they're equitable and they're the same.
Yeah, so the reciprocity and mutualism piece is already at work. That is great. I would love to see teachers from abroad coming to our institution and to our Columbia Public Schools community, just as our students are being hosted for 6 weeks in India. I think that would be a tremendous, tremendous exchange. The other thing is that we often want to collaborate with faculty abroad, but if you are at a Research One institution, as we are, our faculty can buy out time. And so many of them end up teaching 2 courses per semester and dedicating the rest of their time to research. If that faculty member is going to work with a colleague at the University of the Western Cape, for example, in South Africa, they are doing research on their own time. They are teaching 4x4s, and even though their administration is telling them that we desire for you to publish, we desire for you to do research, the mechanisms are not yet in place in a lot of places in the world for them to have the same time allotted to research as there is to teaching. So very often in my own department, I would hear colleagues saying, you know, they're just never on time with the stuff that they need to submit, and it's so hard for me to get a hold of them because they are teaching most of the day, and then we have a 6-hour to 7-hour difference, and it's like, well, you know, the demands on their time are very different. Something else that we're seeing a lot of is that our colleagues in places like Thailand, in Latin America, in places where English is not the native language, are being pressed to publish in index journals that are published in English. And that becomes kind of like in a way, a poaching of local knowledge, because yes, they get to publish in English, they get that indexed journal check mark, but the people in their communities no longer have access to the research that they are conducting in their communities. So the journal that I'm editing is actually an open source journal, and I was talking to our main editor and I said, you know, a lot of these scholars are writing these articles first in their native language, then either translating them or having them translated so that they can submit it to our journal. Is there a way, since it's an electronic publication, that we can have the original language version available so that people in their kind of academic community still have access to it? And he's from Turkey, and he was like, oh my goodness, that would be so easy, and I never thought of it. And I'm like, yeah, that's where reciprocity and mutualism kick in. You can go about this in different ways. Yes, publish in English all you want, but do not ask the scholar to negate their own communities, their own languages, their own ties to their academic community by publishing only for the outside world, and to account for some ranking that at the end of the day doesn't influence the practice where they are at. So there are very easy ways in this electronic world that we can maintain the acknowledgement of the ties to the local communities, and still that engagement with the world. So always looking at the local and the global, not just going so global that you lose sight of where you were at. So unfortunately, when we create a lot of these programs, we tell our students, you're going to have the opportunity to go and serve in this place in sub-Saharan Africa or this place in South America. And they want to serve. They feel helpful. They feel like they're making a change in the world. But unfortunately, many times we end up fossilizing situations of privilege and a sense of supremacy that doesn't necessarily serve the good of humanity. I don't know if any of you have seen Barbie Xavier postings. So this young woman took it upon herself to create a full Facebook account where she narrates this Barbie Savior mentality idea of the Western student or participant in a volunteer program that gets to go to Africa, and they're more interested on the selfie that they're able to take or the profile or the likes that they're going to get on their social media than actually the person who is sitting there that they went out to serve. When we have conversations with our students, either the students that I take to do pre-service teaching abroad or students who participate in global service learning, one of the things that I say to them is like, you don't have to travel more than probably 10 steps on our campus to find somebody who needs help, who could use your energy to achieve something. Unfortunately, we live in a society in which many of our students are food insecure, they are housing insecure, and so the idea that you have to go all the way to Colombia, Peru, Ghana, Kenya, India, Bangladesh to be of service to humanity, it's not the case. You can be of great service if you just have the compassion to see the need that others may have and address that need in your community. And that is one of the things that we try to encourage our students to do. Is like, okay, so yeah, if you want to go and participate in this program abroad, go ahead and do it. But don't come back just with the memories of that program and how you interacted with that community. How do the skills that you gain by getting out of the box and going into these communities and seeing how they are tackling those situations can inform the way that you deal with a similar issue here in your own community. So the unconscious bias that we bring into these conversations is something that supersedes everything that we read and the people that we want to become, and we want to be these awesome human beings. But there are societal forces that have shaped the way that we interrelate with the world. And in the United States, and I'm an American by choice, I actually took a test, filed paperwork. So it's not like I take being an American, it's not part of a geographic accident, as I tell my children they are. I actually have an intentionality in being a member of this community. And I think that because of that, I can be critical and observe the forces that have shaped the way that we behave in the world. So if you think about cultural values in America, we have a history of manifest destiny, which allowed those 13 colonies, once they broke away from Britain, to move on a westward expansion, most of the time, if not all of the time, at the expense of the native peoples who had been living in those areas forever. Missouri, Kansas, they all went through here, and the native populations were either destroyed or placed in some type of enclosure, minimizing their impact over the land that they had moved around on forever. So when we expand the footprint of our universities abroad, is there any of this that may still inform, that we have because of who we are as a nation, because of what we have done as an institution, because of the values that inform our teaching, service, and research? Can we check our privilege before we engage and say, how much of this manifest destiny thing is still informing the way that we're moving around the world? I have heard many of our colleagues in international education say things like, well, everybody wants to get a degree from a U.S. institution. And you go, well, no, more and more they're wanting it from Canada and Australia, and the Chinese are thinking that, our universities are picking up on the rankings. Why would we send our kids across the world? So we might want to kind of take a pause to assuming that everybody wants to come to the U.S., that everybody wants to have an education from a U.S. institution, and see what is the value of a U.S. institution that we can bring, that we can share, that we can utilize to inform the way that research and teaching and service can be expanded, so it doesn't just benefit a small sector of society, but the larger of humanity. The other thing is American exceptionalism, the house on the hill. Part of being in America is thinking that America is great. And when we were told, let's make America great again, we were like, wait, we thought it was great. What happened? And so do we bring that mentality when we engage with our partners abroad or our partners to be abroad? And in some cases, do they assume that as well? That you're from America, you should have it figured out. I was at a conference, we co-sponsor an international education conference with Prince of Sangkla University in Thailand every 3 years. And this year we had a dean panel, and we had deans from Laos, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, the US, and Thailand. And one of the people in the audience said to our US dean, she said, ma'am, with all due respect, why is it that the United States has such great theories of education? Because we all read them. We're all looking at multiple intelligences. We're looking at all this literature that comes about raising children and teaching children. But you do not have the best educational system in the world. You should. And Dr. Grogan said, what happens is that those of us who study education, who research education, who publish about education, do not write policy for education. So that disconnect is there. And so the world is watching, because the world says, you have great theories. You have great theories about democracy. You have great theories about education. Maybe you have great theories about healthcare. But why is a country that has great theories about healthcare, great advances in healthcare, not able to provide healthcare for every one of its citizens, while other countries with less money, with less capacity for innovation is doing just that? And it may not be perfect, it may not be state of the art, but it's available. So those things are good to keep in mind and keep in check as we engage with others. And the other one that is kind of depicted by the last picture is that we have been taught or conditioned to believe that the wealth is in the North, and that somehow we have it to share with the South, and that we bring food to starving children wherever they may be at the moment. And so when we go into partnerships thinking that we bring the solutions, that we bring the wealth, that we bring the knowledge, we don't create an opportunity where we can truly learn and accept what the other has to give. And last night we were talking about the service learning programs, and which we're trying to call learning through service versus service learning. And so I was talking to a group of students on Sunday who are going to Washington, D.C., and they are working with a homeless population there. And so one of my challenges to them was to see the people they were going to encounter as teachers, not as homeless. Because if you go there to a homeless shelter to offer a plate of food to a homeless person, the power dynamic is one of, I have extra, I have more than you, more privilege, more wealth, more bounty, and I'm going to give you something for tonight, and then I'm going to go back to my bountiful world. But if you see that person as a teacher, if you see that person as another soul that has a different earth mission, that has a different journey on this earth, one that you may never step into, but they have it, and at that moment, they're willing to share that with you. And you can learn something, not necessarily about them and their way of being, but you could learn something about yourself that you would have no way of ever knowing if you had not engaged in that exchange. So the positioning of how we see the people that we are encountering, either abroad or domestically, has a great impact on what that relationship is going to yield. So our responsibility in our establishing of international programs, are we approaching internationalization in higher education in ways that further entrench colonialist, capitalist global relations and reproduce the Euro supremacist foundations of modern Western higher education? Or are we truly, if we bother to take a group of students all the way to India, all the way to Thailand, all the way to Ghana, are we there to learn from, with, and among them? Are we willing to do the shedding of whatever box we live in and enter their box for a while? Or are we just going there thinking that we have something to give and here it is, and it's up to you to figure out what you're going to do with that? Because it doesn't always fit all. And the solutions that we have achieved in the West and the global North are solutions for the global North. They're not necessarily solutions for the global South. And so, if anything, we need to work with the processes by which best practices are achieved, not the sharing of best practices. Or not only. So, what if we were to think about bringing students here, not in a mindset of harvesting? Kimberly just read to us the Open Doors numbers of how many students are coming from abroad, their economic impact, the social and cultural capital that they share with us. But are we creating just spaces where those students come part of the tuition kind of bearing in an institution, or are we truly creating spaces for their bodies to feel at home and to share their lived experiences with us and with our students? So it's not just about, oh, we have so many international students, but what opportunities do those students and scholars have to really be authentic and to express and share what they have learned, which may be different from what we have. Also, do we engage in epistemological decolonization as decoloniality to clear the way for new intercultural communication, for an interchange of experiences and meanings as the basis of another rationality which may legitimately pretend to some universality. So when we engage with people around the world, do we just want to create a standardization, or are we willing to be uncomfortable and try being in those spaces and allow them to be themselves in our spaces? It's a give and take, but it can be a beautiful one. And what if we were to create, instead of a universal education for the development of global citizens, I have a little problem with that term, context-specific and culturally relevant forms of globally oriented education that center on the intersection of human rights, resource use, and global sustainability. So instead of saying and we do this in the marketing of a lot of our programs, is we have a program in Vietnam, and what we are trying to do is to make our students into global citizens. No, you do not become a global citizen by going to Vietnam for a month. You become a person who went to Vietnam for a month. Citizenship is something that requires engagement. For me to become a U.S. citizen, I had to learn the language. I had to be here for 5 years. I had to take a test that most Americans would not pass, for what I have heard. So we entrench that supremacy or kind of privilege of the North when we tell students that by traveling a little bit south and being in a different setting for 3 to 4 weeks, they're going to become global citizens. And I find that especially problematic at a time when our own nation does not allow people from countries that we do not approve of to have the possibility to travel into our country or to travel and be with family that they may have here. So global citizenship is not a thing, because if it were, then global mobility would be a thing. So now I want you to think about some of what I have said. I know that time just goes so fast when we're having these conversations. But these are the questions that I want you to think about, reflect about, and maybe talk in small groups, and then we'll have an open sharing. And if you have some questions of me, then I would be happy to entertain this. But how am I being aware of our unconscious collective biases? And I'm thinking about that, like Manifest Destiny, House on the Hill, Global North positionality, influence the way we engage in our international and intercultural partnerships. What practices contribute to more reciprocal and mutualistic global partnerships at home and abroad? And what can you personally do within your professional circle of impact to address coloniality in internationalization efforts? So go at it, talk to the people around you, and then we'll have a wider conversation. I'm good. Yeah. Ticking away. Okay. So for the good of the whole, would we like to share from that side of the room, this middle of the room, just to know what the conversations were about it? Oh yeah, we have this fun.
Who would like to speak? Okay, Dr. Mani. Can you catch? Here you go.
We were talking about this. My question is, why would people don't change their mindset? They would any day go to Haiti and provide health care, but will not cruise on the east side of Kansas City.
Does anybody locally have a response for that? Collective bias.
Collective bias.
I think again it plays into that I need to go save somebody somewhere else mentality, not the I need to maybe look at my community mentality.
Well, and I think in a way, it helps us preserve the idea that everything is good and fine at home. Mm-hmm. Because
Problems
if I
are out
had
there.
to, yeah, poor people are out there, children in need are out there. In the state of Missouri, the average age of a homeless person is 9. And I don't know what it is for Kansas, but when I heard that and I looked it up, there are a lot of families that are homeless, and there are families that have 3 or 4 children, and maybe they're not homeless in the way that we think of homeless, sleeping under a bridge or something like that, but they don't have an address, they don't have a place of their own. They may be with an auntie one week and at a hotel another week, and so if we know that is happening and we go to address it, we have to see the fact that it is, and that as a community and as a society, there are people right here that we are failing. It's easier for us to say, oh, the Duvaliers were empowering Haiti forever and ever. They have had corrupt systems, and so we go there and help. That doesn't force us to look in the mirror to see what is happening in our own communities. I had a similar case when we were sending students to Tanzania. All the girls were taking these pictures surrounded by black children and hugging them, and even they had snooty faces or whatever, they were loving on them. They would get back to their own communities and they couldn't talk to a black parent. And I was like, okay, so it's not the color, it's something else at play here. And it is that societal detachment, and that detachment from the conditions in which the family is living here. And unfortunately, within our educator profession, the savior complex, runs very high. I hear in-service teachers say things like, those children are so fortunate to have me because their families are messed up. And I'm like, cut families some slack. You don't know what the reality is of those families and how they're making ends meet and everything else that goes into play. So that's my theory, is the mirror theory. Other thoughts on that one, or any?
I have one comment, and that is, another side of the story, I think, is that the United States has always been sue happy. And because of that and the fear of litigation, I think that holds some people back from helping within their own communities or their own state or what have you. And whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I used to work in the most litigious state in the nation, and that would always be in the back of my mind.
Thank you.
I think there's some truth to that, in that I've heard some of the doctors speak to that, and in terms of being able to provide like free services here as opposed to free service abroad.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So in a way, the laws that we've created to protect us end up keeping us from servicing the most vulnerable
In our own
community.
neighborhood.
Interesting. There is a
We're recording and we have ITV, so.
Oh, I see. I was going to say, I think from my experience and from those whom I've interacted with, that it starts at a very young age, this mentality, being an American citizen and being taught the idea. So I think it has to start from a young age to also understand other perspectives of the world, because it's like you said, it's something that's just ingrained, like that savior mentality. But people don't talk, even in college, like very smart professors don't usually engage in the conversation of internationalization and addressing coloniality and these like biases that we have in place. And then the higher you go in education, it just continues to like be existing within those educations, and these conversations just continue despite higher levels of education. So I think it has to start from like the ground up and changing this perspective.
Well, and the very young end up in school systems that have as part of their agenda to perpetuate those cultural values. So the staying woke and the critical, being a critical cultural competent agent is something that we don't necessarily espouse. We talk about creating critical thinkers, but a lot of the times we're very happy with critical thinkers as long as they're not criticizing us.
Or me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you tell your children, I want you to be absolutely and positively honest about everything. And then they go, you know, Mom, I think that. And you're like, well, not about me. Be honest about other things, about other people. Yeah. So, what other thoughts came up in the conversations you were having?
Yes.
You're not going to try to toss it?
Well, I don't want to.
You have any ideas?
So I honestly think individual difference play a part, because somehow I feel we are having such an experience because we are from Ghana in Africa, and it's not, I don't like to say this, but it's quite deprived. So there are some things you cannot easily have access to in Ghana, and it's like all over the place here in America. But everybody feels it's actually cool to not have them. And I'm like, really? But then nobody is being, just because you are black, they don't want to offer you help or give you access to what you don't have back in like your country. So I honestly think it's a matter of individual differences. Some people will be nice to you irrespective of whatever colonial background or whatever you are deprived of. Others will be a little cold because that's just how they are. So I don't think we should make a hasty generalization about whether or not it's the case in the whole of America. I honestly think it has something to do with individual differences.
Yeah, and we have power over our behavior and how we engage with people, so I greatly appreciate that. I have a friend who's a psychologist in Spain, and he's like, you know, Gabrielle, all this talk about diversity, all this talk about people being different and yet the same, and cultural context, he said, when it comes to humans, the similarities stop at 23 pairs of chromosomes. After that, we're all different. And it's like, well, that just simplified it to 7.3 billion or something like that, possibilities. So, thank you.
I just wanted to bring up in a perspective in that I think by taking individuals to study abroad and get their experience, that I see when they come back, they're more aware of their own surroundings and they get more involved in their own community, because before it was almost like they had blinders on and they didn't see what was right next door to them. But as they experience it somewhere else, it's almost like they come back a better person and are able to relate to the community more because they're more aware of it and more in tune to it. And I think that's what the value of study abroad is that it brings you in a self-awareness of your surroundings, and you live in the moment instead of by the moment. So I think it's important that concept in study abroad is important in that way, that it brings us to our own self-awareness.
Yeah, one of our favorite quotes, and my team can help me with this, speaks to that. It's like, why do you go away? and it's so that you can see everything through a new pair of glasses, new lenses. So the colors are different. You go away so you can come back and you see everything differently with, through new lenses when you come back, including yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we find with the students who participate in Teach Abroad programs is that when we come back, they start looking for jobs in more multicultural schools or jobs abroad. The homogeneous classroom does not appeal to them anymore.
Yes, Dr. Mani?
I may make a comment.
Yes, sir.
That orientation of the students going overseas is so critical. We have a program where we send students to India. And I can attest that of the 110 students that we sent overseas, we have 110 people with changed minds. But we even go to the extent of teaching them to how to eat with their fingers like Indian people do. So orientation is critical before you send somebody off to some other part of the world.
Yeah, and something interesting with the orientations is that we've begun to do re-entry orientations when they are still in the foreign country, because they have received so much information. And in India, I say I love India because it courts all your senses at the same time. It's your hearing, your smells, your visuals, everything. You cannot be not present in India. You just have to be awake all the time. And so having conversations with the students to process the experience they have just had and how it is going to inform the conversations they will have, the practices they will have in the classroom, is something that before we used to do after they got here, and it gets confused in a way if you don't do it in country. Now we're looking at sending students to Cuba. And when you hear the story of Cuba-U.S. relations from Cubans in Cuba, it's very different from anything they have learned about U.S.-Cuba relations here. So that was when we started talking about, students need re-entry orientations. How are they going to talk about the embargo with their families, acknowledging that this is the Cuban lived experience, this is what we learn from Cubans, and not sounding anti-American or not sounding critical, maybe, but not having to fight even family members because their position is informed differently.
Right.
So it becomes kind of like an expansion that sometimes doesn't allow them to come back to the box in which they lived. I have a fellow, a colleague at Buffalo State, and we pride ourselves in being box smashers. It's like we don't just take students out of the box. When we take them out of the box, we have them stomp them, and they will never fit in that box again. And it's what you say. If you take 110 students, the transformation is going to be so evident. And sometimes it's immeasurable by standard ways of measuring. This morning I said when I was in my interview with my dean and he asked me, how are you going to measure? I said, how do you measure the etching of a soul? They are going to be a totally different person by having had this experience. And it may be something that we don't get to measure 5 months from now, a year from now, but I know that I am still being shaped by the study abroad opportunity that I had when I was an undergrad. So it's something that stays with you for a very, very long time. Were there any thoughts in that side of the room? You guys have been so quiet over there. You want to share with us? We'll toss you one of these microphones. Related to the presentation or just life in general?
Just in general.
Okay. Do you want to share a little bit?
Here you go.
I work in the office, so I'm the wrong person to ask.
Oh, okay.
What about ITV?
Oh, you go ahead.
We are just two international students here. I'm from Israel, he's from Brazil.
Okay.
So I asked if some people go to Israel, and she just explained about some situation why you cannot send anyone to Israel. And then we spoke a bit about Brazil.
Well, that's related because there are cultural contexts that prevent us from I know that visas are granted and denied all over the world, but I learned only this year that there are friends of mine from Israel whose passports don't allow them to even apply for a visa to a particular country. I never even thought of that because we talk about student and scholar mobility and people mobility. But the privilege of the blue passport is something that we talk to our students a lot. When I was traveling with a Colombian passport, if I was in Spain and wanted to go to Portugal, this was before the UE, they said, oh, it'll take about 6 months for us to process your visa. And I'm like, what? All my American friends are going tomorrow. And so, yeah. It's something that doesn't necessarily happen for everyone.
I don't know about ITV. Were there anybody online? Any comments? Wichita, Salina?
There are people watching.
Take that as a no.
Questions.
All right.
All right.
That's watching.
I hope this gave you some food for thought. And if you want to follow up in the conversation, Kimberly has my...
And we have a meeting at 3.
Oh, we have a gathering at 3. So if anybody wants to join us for a more informal conversation, that would be terrific. Kimberly also has my contact information. So if there's anything that you would like to follow up with, I would love to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much.